If Russia stops fighting, there will be peace. If Ukraine stops fighting, it will cease to exist as an independent sovereign nation in Europe.
We told the Russians in 1991 and 1992 repeatedly and in writing, although not in a signed treaty, that if they removed the 400 troops from Germany and allowed Germany to reunite under NATO, that we would not move NATO 1 inch to the east. We've since then moved it 1,000 miles to the east and 14 countries. Not only that, but we have put Aegis missile systems which can launch nuclear missiles in Romania and Poland, right on the Russian border. The Russians, Bill Burns, who was the U.S. ambassador to Russia at that time and is now the head of the CIA, sent a famous memo in which he said, if you moved NATO into the Ukraine, it is a red line that cannot be crossed. And we need to put ourselves in the Russians' shoes and actually understand. My uncle always said, you have to put yourself in your adversary's shoes.
We are concerned about the changes that are taking place in NATO. What is this going to mean for Russia? Europe, not yet having freed itself from the heritage of the Cold War, is in danger of plunging into a cold peace.
I believe it's a mistake. It's a bad mistake.
И меня не убедят заявления, декларации самого такого респектабельного характера относительно того, что России нечего беспокоить.
And I'm not persuaded by the assurances that we hear that Russia has nothing to worry about. That was abruptly suspended or terminated in 1990.
Нельзя унижать народ, нацию, и нельзя рассчитывать, что это так пройдет все.
You may not humiliate a nation, a people, and think that it'll have no consequences.
Ну и другое, это что уже, новая стратегия?
So my question is this a new strategy?
Говорят, нет. И оборвались в конце 91-го года.
I think it is
Вот если это будет продолжаться так, тогда все, о чем мы говорили, перечисляли, целый перечень проблем, их трудно будет решить.
I feel that if
начнем разыгрывать карты друг против друга.
I feel that if the same kind of games continue to be played, if one country plays some card against the other country, then all of those problems, all of those issues that we've been mentioning today will be very difficult to resolve.
I think the one place where the greatest consternation would be caused in the short term for admission, having nothing to do with the merit and preparedness of the country to come in, would be to admit the Baltic states now in terms of NATO-Russian, U.S.-Russian relations. And if there was ever anything that was going to tip the balance, were it to be tipped in terms of a vigorous and hostile reaction, I don't mean military, in Russia, it would be that. Where do they go? I had one interesting comment. Our conversation with Zaganov was repeated with Lebed. They talked about they don't want this NATO expansion. They know it's not in their security interests and on, and said, well, and if you do that, we may have to look to China. And I couldn't help using the colloquial expression from my state by saying to Zaganov, lots of luck in your senior year. Good luck. And if that doesn't work, try Iran. I'm serious. I said that to them, and these were, and they know, I knew, they knew, everybody knows that that is not an option.
Я бы сказал, что это не знаменательное событие, а печальное событие.
Jeg vil ikke kalle først og fremst denne begivenheten bemerkelsesverdig, men snarere en
Наша позиция оставалась, остается прежней. Мы считаем, что это движение не в правильном направлении расширения НАТО.
I have given formal notice to Russia, in accordance with the treaty, that the United States of America is withdrawing from this almost 30-year-old treaty. I have concluded the ABM treaty hinders our government's ability to develop ways to protect our people from future terrorists or rogue state missile attacks.
First, from President John Kennedy speaking at American University, June 1963, the United States, as the world knows, will never start a war. Speaking almost 20 years later, President Ronald Reagan concurred. The defense policy of the United States is based on a simple premise. The United States does not start fights. We will never be an aggressor. Now, given such authoritative assurances, how then can we explain the George W. Bush's administration's promulgation of a doctrine of preventive war in the first year of the 21st century? The simple answer, of course, is that 9/11 changed everything. All bets were off. So too were the gloves. In order to prevent another 9/11, the United States had no choice but to go permanently on the offensive. And with the Bush Doctrine, Washington granted itself the authority to do just that. End of story. But the truth is more complicated. In fact, the Bush Doctrine possesses a considerable provenance. Its gestation period coincides with the age of overkill, the years when authorities in Washington made nuclear striking capacity the cornerstone of U.S. national security policy, and then more or less as an afterthought assessed the implications of having done so. Wrestling with those implications gave birth to a new tradition of strategic thought.
The other doctrine that's really important, and it's a change of attitude, it's going to require a change of attitude for a while, is that when you see a threat, you got to deal with it before it hurts you.
With this track record, Iraqi denials of supporting terrorism take their place alongside the other Iraqi denials of weapons of mass destruction. It is all a web of lies. When we confront a regime that harbors ambitions for regional domination, hides weapons of mass destruction, and provides haven and active support for terrorists, we are not confronting the past. We are confronting the present. And unless we act, we are confronting an even more frightening future.
My fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger. On my orders, coalition forces have begun striking selected targets of military importance to undermine Saddam Hussein's ability to wage war. These are opening stages of what will be a broad and concerted campaign.
The United States will use any means necessary to protect our citizens and those of our allies from unjust prosecution by this illegitimate court. We will not cooperate with the ICC. We will provide no assistance to the ICC, and we certainly will not join the ICC. We will let the ICC die on its own. After all, for all intents and purposes, the ICC is already dead to us.
Получается, что НАТО выдвигает свои передовые силы к нашим государственным границам, а мы, строго выполняя договор, никак не реагируем на эти действия. Думаю, очевидно, процесс натовского расширения не имеет никакого отношения к модернизации самого Альянса или к обеспечению безопасности в Европе. Наоборот, это серьезно провоцирующий фактор, снижающий уровень взаимного доверия. И у нас есть справедливое право откровенно спросить, против кого это расширение.
So we spent a lot of time talking about NATO. First, I do want to remind people that Ukraine and the NATO alliance have built a strong partnership. Ukraine is the only non-NATO nation supporting every NATO mission.
It is in our vital national interest to send an additional 30,000 U.S. troops to Afghanistan. Today, I authorize the Armed Forces of the United States to begin a limited military action in Libya. Good evening. Today, I authorize 2 operations in Iraq. There were times where, for example, with respect to drones, that I had to kind of stop the system for a second and say, you know what, we're getting too comfortable with our ability to take kinetic strikes around the world without having enough process to avoid consistently the kinds of civilian casualties that can end up actually hurting us in the war against radicalization.
I have no doubt after our meeting that President Yanukovych knows what he needs to do.
People of Ukraine, this is your moment. Народе український, це ваш момент. This is about you, no one else. Це про вас. This is about the future you want for your country.
When you're a high-ranking official talking about diplomatic efforts in Ukraine, the last thing you want to do is drop your guard.
So that would be great, I think, to help glue this thing and have the UN help glue it and, you know, the EU.
But that is exactly what reportedly happened between US Assistant Secretary of State Victoria Nuland and US Ambassador to Ukraine Jeffrey Pyatt. The exchange has since surfaced online, including the crude swipe at the European Union. The audio clip of a woman and man, said to be Nuland and Pyatt, hears them discussing strategies to work with the 3 main opposition figures.
I don't think Klitsch should go into the government. I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's a good idea.
In terms of him not going into the government, just let him sort of stay out and do his political homework and stuff. I'm just thinking in terms of sort of the process moving ahead, we want to keep the moderate Democrats together. The problem is going to be Tony Book and his guys. And, you know, I'm sure that's part of what Yanukovych is calculating on all of this.
I think Yats is the guy who's got the economic experience, the governing experience. He's the guy, you know, what he needs is Klitsch and Tony Book on the outside. He needs to be talking to them 4 times a week.
Hundreds of protesters spread along the barricades on Independence Square, throwing whatever they could get their hands on. They targeted lines of security forces a short distance away in the government-declared ceasefire. The president said no more violence.
No. The president only says, they say all times.
This is the hardcore element of the protest crowd, wearing homemade body armor, carrying shields, those prepared to take the fight directly to the security services. Shortly after, those officers received an order to pull back, once again giving up the square to the opposition.
But ultimately, there's not going to be a military solution to this confrontation. What's going to solve this over the long term is Ukraine becoming a healthy, economically transparent democracy anchored in European institutions. And we're working as hard as we can to help to advance that effort. But ultimately, there's not going to be a military solution.
What is the purpose of your training mission here? Is it to help the Ukrainians counter the pro-Russia forces in eastern Ukraine?
No, we're here to train Ukrainian National Guard.
Right, but the National Guard, they just came back from the front lines in eastern Ukraine fighting the pro-Russia forces. Is that correct?
I don't know. Did they?
Well, your commander said that they just came back from the ATO zone.
Personally, I don't have such information. I can say no or yes.
Okay, so you haven't been told whether you're training them so that they can better fight the pro-Russia forces or not?
No, we train them to so they can encounter and be efficient in any situation.
But you're aware that there is a war going on in
Of
Ukraine?
course.
You've heard the news?
Of course.
Okay. The U.S. Congress has approved giving Ukraine weapons, lethal aid as they call it, but President Obama hasn't signed the order yet. So these trainers here are kind of like a consolation prize for the Ukrainian military. Вы служили в зоне АТО уже?
Да, у нас все 100% служили.
Ну что, вы думаете, получите что-нибудь полезное от этих американцев, или это просто показуха для камер, что Америка помогает Украине?
Не знаю, какие, допустим, у американцев там будут эти на нас планы. Но я так понял, что помогать нам никто не собирается.
The reaction in Moscow has been strong, negative, a suggestion by President Putin's spokesman that this could destabilize the situation in the country. We interpret that to mean a new conflict or a new outbreak of violence in the southeast.
Right after the end of the Cold War, when we signed important agreements, we had a calmer situation, and people believed more in the possibility of improvement. Now it's alarming. The time is alarming, and therefore, let us not engage in mutual accusations. Let us rebuild the trust that has been erected, and let us cooperate.
From this day forward, a new vision will govern our land. From this day forward, it's going to be only America first. America first. I am announcing today that the United States will withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal. You have to have everybody adhere to it, and you have a certain side that almost pretends it doesn't exist. I think we have a very good relationship with Russia, but Russia didn't adhere to the treaty, so until they adhere, we will pull out.
The United States aids Ukraine and her people so that we can fight Russia over there and we don't have to fight Russia here.
We have reason to believe the Russian forces are planning to and intend to attack Ukraine in the coming week, in the coming days.
The Russian army is at NATO's doorstep is because NATO has expanded rather than the Russians expanding? That, in other words, NATO has moved closer to Russia rather than Russia moving closer to NATO? Is that not an accurate way to look at this?
I think that's the way President Putin probably looks at it. It's certainly not the way that we look at it.
You don't think that NATO has expanded eastward toward Russia?
NATO has expanded,
okay.
and the expansion has been a good thing for...
So the reason that the Russian army is at NATO's doorstep is not the fault of the Russian army, it's not the Russian army that's done it. It's NATO has moved closer to moved
I'm pretty
east.
sure it wasn't NATO who was ordering, upwards of 15 battalion tactical groups to within 10 kilometers of the border with Ukraine. And I'm pretty sure it wasn't NATO who put little green men inside Ukraine to destabilize eastern
I'm
states.
pretty sure that Ukraine is not a member of NATO. So unless that's changed,
It's not changed, but I'm pretty sure the movement by Russia is Russia's decision.
if NATO has moved east, the reason that the Russian army is closer or on NATO's doorstep is because NATO moved.
NATO is not an anti-Russia alliance. NATO is a security alliance.
For 50 years, it was an anti-Soviet alliance. So do you not understand it? So do you not understand how, or can you not even see how the Russians will perceive it as a threat? And the fact that it keeps getting closer to their border, while their troops, I mean, the places where their troops are, you say their troops are, and may have been in Ukraine and Georgia, are not NATO members.
I'm not going to pretend to know what goes in President Putin's mind or Russian military commanders. I mean, I barely got a history degree at the University of South Florida. What I can tell you is that NATO is a defensive alliance. It remains a defensive alliance.
Fair enough, but it has moved east, correct? I mean, that's just a fact.
It has expanded, absolutely.
Right, exactly.
But there's no reason for anybody to think the expansion is a hostile or threatening move.
Would be to admit the Baltic states now in terms of NATO-Russian, U.S.-Russian relations. And if there was ever anything that was going to tip the balance, were it to be tipped in terms of a vigorous and hostile reaction, I don't mean military, in Russia, it would be that.
And we've been saying that throughout the last 15 years, Matt.
You're moving closer to Russia. You're blaming the Russians for being close to NATO.
No.
That's exactly what Hagel's
We're blaming the Russians for violating the territorial integrity of Ukraine and destabilizing the security
which is
situation
not a
inside
NATO
Europe.
member.
Ukraine is the only non-NATO nation supporting every NATO mission.
It's not about I want to talk with Putin. I think I have to talk with Putin. The world has to talk with Putin because there are no other ways to stop this war.
In 2021, we kept reiterating that Ukraine was going to join. We kept saying that over and over again. So our diplomats are lying?
Yes.
Yes,
that's the real world, guys. Come on,
that, but you could.
That's the real world.
Wait a sec. Our diplomats are lying all the time, yet the Russians should trust them when they offer assurances.
No.
And
if one country plays some card against the other country, then all of those problems, all of those issues that we've been mentioning today will be very difficult to resolve.
In terms of a vigorous and hostile reaction, I don't mean military, in Russia, it would be that.
In order to prevent another 9/11, the United States had no choice but to go permanently on the offensive.
You got to deal with it before it hurts you.
И у нас есть справедливое право откровенно спросить, против кого это расширение.
We're getting too comfortable with our ability to take kinetic strikes around the world.
But ultimately, there's not going to be a military solution.
Не знаю, какие, допустим, у американцев там будут эти на нас планы.
The EU.
We interpret that to mean a new conflict or a new outbreak of violence.
Let us not engage in mutual accusations.
America first. America first.